Welcome to the Confidence Through Health podcast. My name is Jerry Snyder. As a health, wellness, and sports performance coach, my goal each week is to bring you experts to help you take control of your health and build your self-confidence. Thanks for including me today on your journey to better health. I want to say thank you to Social Media Cowboys for sponsoring this week's episode of the Confidence Through Health podcast. If you need help with a website, if you need social media needs for your business, if you need help with AdWords, SEO, all those things that you know you should be doing, but you are too busy to do or you're too confused about, they are the experts that you need in your corner. If you're interested in launching a podcast, such as mine, they help me edit my podcast and do a fantastic job making sure that all of the technical side of it is handled and we launch a nice, neat, edited podcast episode each week. So I want to thank Social Media Cowboys for their continued sponsorship of the Confidence Through Health podcast. You can find them at socialmediacowboys.com, or you can find them as well with other sponsors at confidencethroughhealth.com. So Jessica, I want to thank you for being a guest on the Confidence Through Health podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Jerry.
So I was really there's a couple of reasons why I wanted to have you on. One, because I think what you talk about and help people with is something that a lot of people can do on their own and learn how to do on their own to take care of themselves. And that's one of the things that I highly promote is understanding your own body and taking care of yourself as much as you can. But I also have we adopted both of our kids, and our son has had issues with being able to regulate himself. He's 14. And so I've learned a lot about how important this is for your overall health, but just growing and understanding and being able to communicate with other people and just daily living and how to be quote unquote a normal person.
Mhm.
Right. So tell us a little bit about how you got involved with understanding and wanting to dive into the nervous system and how to help people with being regulated in their daily lives.
Sure. So if we go back to 2017, I was working in my own clinic as a
Mhm.
physiotherapist, and I largely saw patients that would come in to see me for something like lower back pain.
Mhm.
And when we dug a little bit deeper, I would see that there was much more going on beneath the surface.
Right.
And so I guess I felt a little bit like I was just looking at what was above the water of an iceberg when I looked at the pain.
Mhm.
But what was underneath the water were things like their nervous system wasn't balanced, the vagus nerve wasn't working well. There were changes in the area of the brain that we call the survival brain.
Mhm.
And I knew that there was this link from when people were coming in with physical symptoms to what was going on for them emotionally. And I didn't have a framework to explain this to people that didn't sound like telling them their symptoms were all in their head.
Right.
And so it was really about me feeling empowered as a clinician, but also empowering my patients because I felt a little bit like my patients would come to see me for their back pain. They would go and see somebody else for their digestive issues.
Mhm.
They would be getting sleeping tablets from their doctor.
Right.
And then, and it was this really siloed approach.
Mhm.
And it wasn't really getting to the root cause of what was going on. It was just,
Right.
treating symptoms. So in 2017, I decided to close down my clinic and take a sabbatical to
Mhm.
study all about the nervous system, the vagus nerve, and the sensory systems. And right before I was due to go, I lost my older brother.
Mm.
And so it created a period of dysregulation for
Right.
myself. And so I really had to learn to walk the talk. And it ties back to what you said, Jerry. A lot of what I learned was that people can do this themselves.
Mhm.
And I was really passionate to help people do that because I wanted to help them break free from that suffering.
Right.
And so that became my mission when I came back to work. I really worked on giving people the tools, the frameworks, the understanding of how the nervous system works and what they need to build regulation.
Right. And because there's so many different things, correct, that can cause us to go out of balance, right? So there, and it's there's not just one thing that's like, oh, just avoid that. Like, and some things can be triggers for some people and not for others, right?
Exactly. This is what's so fascinating about it. So, predominantly who I work with are people who've experienced chronic and traumatic stress.
Hmm.
And if we look at what that means, that could be anything from something that happened in our childhood, a way that our needs weren't met, that we didn't
Right.
have parents that could give us that. And it's interesting because children come into the world with these, we call them biological expectations to be
Mhm.
held, to have touch, to be
Right.
soothed, for co-regulation. And without that, they have challenges with development. So
Hmm.
there is this, expectation, but it's really what we experience throughout our lives where our system is either overwhelmed by one thing
Hmm.
or a period of time. But it can also be for people who, say, have a series of events where their nervous system doesn't get to complete the stress response.
Right.
And so that's what really inhibits the vagus nerve. And so then people are in this state where they're stuck in anxiety, like the
Hmm.
on button's jammed,
Right.
urgency, can't switch off, or they get stuck in a state where they feel flat, apathetic, disconnected, dissociated.
Yeah.
And so the what we look to do is to help them come back to that place of regulation, where their energy's stable, they are
Hmm.
flexible, adaptable, and all those wonderful things that help people live well.
Right. And it's knowing those things is important, but it's also one of the things that I found because yeah, I went to a conference about regulation and self-regulation, and my son at the time was probably he was probably 4 or 5, and it like the light bulb clicked off, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is like what my son deals with all the time. He's in he was adopted, so there's some things that happened prior to, like, in utero and things like that we know he's battling against from a genetic standpoint. But um, but he's got that chronic where it it just continues to build and build and build, and then once it goes off, it's like, what happened? Like,
Mm,
and so
mm.
for me to have those tools, and obviously now we're teaching him those tools that he's 14, that he can be like, oh, this little bitty situation didn't set you off. It was all of these other things that you never actually dealt with. That
Yes.
then that little bitty straw is the last one that just throws everything out of whack. But it's like it's not really that thing. It was all the other things that you never dealt with that you didn't see coming up.
Totally. And I love that you bring this point up because I think we get the message around self-regulation that it's actually about calming down,
Hmm.
but that's not really what we're looking to do. And you just said this beautifully. We're looking to notice what's happening
Right.
inside of us with accuracy and then use that information in an empowered way to meet our
Hmm.
needs and to proactively manage our emotions.
Yeah.
But I think there's a little bit of this message going around now that we're supposed to be calm and,
Hmm.
this one flat baseline, but
Yeah.
it's not about that at all. Self-regulation. And, I worked in pediatrics with
Hmm.
children, and that's where a lot of this work comes from too. It's really about the senses and the body
Right.
and listening to what's happening. And so part of our ability to manage both our bodily states like thirst, hunger, if we get enough sleep, which
Hmm.
all play a big role, as I'm sure you see with a
Yep.
teenager,
Yep.
but it's also those same bodily signals that are the foundation of our emotions.
Hmm.
So that ability to tune into our bodily signals is what we call interoception.
Hmm.
So to read and understand them with accuracy, and that's really the vagus nerve's job. So
Yeah.
I do a lot of this work now And it's not just people who are dysregulated that need this work.
Hmm.
Everybody can benefit from
Right.
having, clear interoception to tune into what it is we need. And it can be as simple as, like I said, being thirsty and we notice the dry throat, the foggy head, but it could also be the conversation that we need to have with somebody at work.
Mm,
It can
right.
be, my relationship has this struggle and this is deep down what I'm missing.
Yeah.
So it's such a broad way that we can look at this and we can all benefit from it.
Right. And in knowing those pieces or being able to see those pieces inside of you and like those are things that like you said, it's not about calming down. It's about understanding and going, okay, I need to figure out how to deal with that situation and not, like we were taught as we were kids, stuff it down. Like, don't just stuff it,
Yeah.
right? Just like just, the one of the things that I hate is like, the boys don't cry. Like,
Oh,
right? Like those types of things because it's
yes.
sometimes a good cry is what you need to reset your nervous system.
It's a way that we discharge the stress activation and it
Right.
allows us to complete that stress response and that settles our nervous system. And I think it's exactly what you're saying, it can be boys don't cry. So that's a way we override our
Hmm.
interoception. We ignore it.
Right.
But it's just, I see a lot of women that think that anger is a bad thing. And
Mm,
so when they get annoyed about something, they're like, I shouldn't feel like this. I should
right.
get rid of it. Instead of actually going, what's the message here? What
Hmm.
am I irritated about? And
Yeah.
if they could catch that irritation and annoyance early, then they're empowered to take care of whatever they need to. But
Right.
then it gets to escalates to anger or they react in a way they don't like,
Hmm.
which is really disempowering.
Hmm.
So that all of that skill that we're talking about is what we call that eighth sensory system of interoception.
Yeah.
And I think we probably live in a culture that teaches particularly children more compliance rather than
Hmm.
that ability to listen in. So the
Yeah.
work that you're doing with your son is really profound.
Yeah. And that's it. And I mean, it's important because to be able to have relationships, which I think is another piece of social media is causing changes in how we relate to each other. But anybody that understands like healthy lifestyles and healthy understands that we're meant to be in relationships with each other and have friends and have close connections and because it we feed our energy off of each other and it's how we can help regulate our own emotions and being able to talk to somebody at a real level and being able to say, no, this is who I am. This is how I feel. This is right. Because like you said earlier, if you don't, you're just sort of like you're glassing over it and you never really deal with it until that moment that it comes out in anger, which that's never a good situation for anybody.
No. And I think what you're saying, and I totally agree with, is there's a lot of avoidance now.
Hmm.
There's a lot of avoidance of what we feel, but the when we recognize what we feel, there's avoidance around the conversations that maybe we need to have because
Yeah.
we're scared of what we feel. We're scared of, or what if this, interrupt or upset somebody else or somebody else gets
Hmm.
angry with me. But I really believe that it's our willingness to have those uncomfortable conversations
Hmm.
that bring us peace in our life and within our relationships and deeper connections with people because those ruptures are a part of life,
Right.
whether it's our romantic relationships or our family or our friends or our
Yeah.
community or our workplace. It's going to happen at some point.
Right. Because that stress is what like there's good stress, but that kind of stress is the bad stress on the nervous system. And so explain to us like when we have that negative stress that's weighing us down and we're not dealing with it. And like so how does that affect us? Because the vagus nerve connects most of our body and like how we operate, correct? So like how does that negative stress physiologically manifest itself?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I love that you said this, that, we can have stress that's actually not bad because
Right.
there's this process, this built-in process that we have called allostasis. So if you think about what stress is, it's actually our brain and our body mobilizing energy so
Hmm.
that we can face a demand, face a threat.
Right.
Now, that's a really healthy thing. So, our body mobilizes glucose. We feel that come in where we need to do something, the
Hmm.
urgency.
Right.
So, if we say, okay, stress is mobilization, immediately we look at it as a different thing. We are programmed to mobilize, and then ideally we'd complete or deal with whatever we had to, and then it would be the vagus nerve that would help that recovery process.
Right.
So when the vagus nerve comes in, well, actually, what happens first of all is the vagus nerve releases, and then that allows that mobilizing energy to come in, and then it comes, then it's reapplied like a brake.
Hmm.
Like so. If you imagine you're riding a bicycle downhill and
Yeah.
you keep the brake on because you don't want to go too fast. Let's say you let a little bit of the brake out. That's what it does to mobilize our
Hmm.
energy, and then it re-engages when the stress is over. Now,
Gotcha.
that process of like move away from a set point and return, that's called allostasis. And
Hmm.
so we can recover fully. There's nothing, bad that happens with that.
Right.
I would say it's actually makes us healthy if we allow that process to happen
Hmm.
quite frequently and challenge ourselves.
Right.
It's like going to the gym.
Hmm.
But what happens when we have chronic stress? Let's say we mobilize energy to meet a stressor, but we don't get the time to recover from it
Hmm.
because the stress is relentless.
Right.
The vagus nerve can't come back in. And so it's like changing the set point in a thermostat in a house.
Hmm.
So let's say the temperature begins to shift up because we're
Hmm.
not coming back down with that temperature.
Right.
And so it's like the house gets too hot. So this can be like the hardwood floors might crack
Right.
and we can't, deal with the maintenance of the house we need
Hmm.
to. Now, if we look at this as traumatic stress, it's a little bit similar where we get this, first of all, this mobilization, but it's
Hmm.
much more extreme.
Right.
But we also get a co-activation of what we call our dorsal vagal or immobilizing energy. So it'd be a little bit like, say, you're driving in a car. First of all, you put the accelerator down,
Hmm.
really far to go fast, to get
Right.
away, whatever it is
Right.
you need to do. And then you pull the handbrake on.
Hmm.
So people will feel they go into like a freeze, they
Right.
collapse, they're stuck.
Yeah.
And so that's really, because what you said before, all of these experiences are very subjective.
Hmm.
I can't say, Jerry, that wasn't trauma,
Right.
or it was.
Yeah.
It's your experience, and it will depend on genetics, your
Sure.
history, and the meaning you make of it.
Right.
But I think we could say that when we have that co-activation of mobilization, like the accelerator's down,
Hmm.
and immobilization, the handbrake's on,
Yeah.
that could potentially define what traumatic stress is.
Right.
Um, and when that happens, people can continue to respond in that same way until that recovery takes place, which for some people, that's 10, 20 years later.
Right.
And they can have ongoing anxiety,
Hmm.
ongoing depression, collapse, or freeze whenever
Right.
there's a challenge.
Right. And that kind of stressor creates so many different chronic conditions in somebody, right? It can
Yeah,
lead to so many different things because the body truly doesn't get a chance to go into a rest and recovery state and truly repair itself. And so it's like it's almost like you've got a fire burning and it never goes out,
exactly.
right?
So perfect analogy. And it's like, think about it as though, so we can call this if allostasis, that process of mobilized recovery doesn't happen,
Mhm.
we then say allostatic load will build. So what you're talking about, we can call allostatic load, which
Mhm.
is it's like the wear and tear that accumulates on the brain and the
Right.
body. But if you think of the thermostat being set too high in the house that's too hot, hardwood floors crack. Well,
Mhm.
what we might see this in ourselves is digestive issues, Like the gut is a really clear indication of what's happening
Right.
because the vagus nerve goes straight from the brain down to the gut. We might see it as people with insomnia.
Hmm.
We might see the immune system has changes, but
Right.
really any system in the body can be impacted by that.
Right.
For some people, it's like the thermostat in the house is set too cold. And, it's like imagine if your roof was leaking water and
Hmm.
it was like there was mold and water starting to accumulate. You can't take care of longer term projects on the house like painting
Right.
when you're trying to patch up the roof, when you're trying to
Right.
stop, these emergencies. Well,
Yeah.
if people are living in a body that thinks there's an emergency, they're not going to worry about breaking down food properly. They're not going to worry
Hmm.
about hormonal balance. So we
Right.
see this show up, and that's what I was mentioning at the start. I was seeing people with physical pain, like
Right.
pain in their lower back, but underneath that was a dysregulated nervous system driving the immune system to create
Hmm.
inflammation.
Hmm.
And so when we as practitioners can get underneath that, we can have an impact on how somebody's emotions are, their
Right.
psychological health, their physical health. And this is where I love to help practitioners to work in not such a siloed way, but
Hmm.
in a real integrative way
Right.
that looks at brain and body.
Yeah. But it's not correct. It's not just like, okay, you could have digestive issues and it not be dysregulated. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's happening, but it's a good thing. It's something you want to have your practitioner look at, right?
Exactly.
You want to
I
be
think
like, okay, let's make sure that that's not driving this first.
exactly. The biggest way that we can tell is if it's chronic, so like
Mhm.
say it just keeps going on and on and on.
Mhm.
Now, irritable bowel syndrome is a really clear example of this, and that's actually now been reclassified as a disorder of gut-brain interaction.
Oh, wow.
So it's really the vagus nerve's gut-brain interaction that's
Hmm.
causing IBS. So I think if we have like an acute thing, we always want to get that checked out.
Hmm.
Absolutely.
Right.
But it's when we have this ongoing presentation, and
Hmm.
particularly if there's other things too, like we're anxious, we can't
Right.
sleep, and our gut isn't great, we might start to go, oh, this is happening whenever I'm having a difficult time.
Hmm.
And that can be a clue that it is a dysregulated nervous system.
Right. Um, and so is that something that because I know you work both with individuals going through this, but also with practitioners trying to help them understand how this connection is going on in people's bodies so that they can take that next step and go, okay, well, it's you've got digestive issues, just take this pill, but actually go, okay, wait, let's look at this and see what what could be causing this outside of, okay, you've got a virus or a bacteria that's causing disruption.
Yes, yes. So now I work predominantly with practitioners to
Hmm.
help them put this into place as a framework. I think the biggest challenge for practitioners is there's so many different things that could be going on, but
Sure.
also there's so many different ways to look at the nervous system. And what most practitioners need is not this whole modality, like they're
Hmm.
busy enough. They need the frameworks, the sequencing, and the structure that helps them put it into place in their current modality. So
Right.
that's really the essence of the work I do now
Yeah.
is to help them apply that. And the beauty of nervous system work is we don't need to do hours and hours of it to get really good results.
Mm.
It's more that we give, like helping practitioners teach their clients how to
Right.
do this themselves is the biggest
Right.
part of it.
Right. And so when you and granted, I'm sure this can have a range to it as far as like, okay, I have figured out that my system is dysregulated. I've got the tools to try and help fix it. How long is it like an instantaneous or is it like I've got to keep practicing this on a daily basis to get to where I can feel like okay, this is working.
That's such a great question, Jerry. When somebody uses the resources that are specific to the state they're in,
Hmm.
and I say specific because there isn't one or two exercises that work for everyone. We
Right.
really need to look at what state is someone coming in with. Like
Hmm.
if you're talking about your son and you say he escalates, builds,
Hmm.
builds, builds, like it sounds like more mobilization.
Right.
And he probably, by the sounds of it, doesn't read his bodily signals well.
Right.
So we would specific ways that we said, okay, for that particular pattern, this is what we would use.
Right.
So when that works, when we get that nailed, people feel better straight away. There's that
Hmm.
sense of like, oh, or it can be like you said, some people release it through tears as a
Right.
way they discharge that stress activation. So if we're looking at what we spoke about before, when allostasis doesn't recover,
Hmm.
essentially what that means is the nervous system didn't get to discharge that stress activation.
Right.
When a resource works properly, there will be that discharge of stress activation that can be from a long time ago. And
Okay.
that is like what's changing the thermostat in the house. Now, when people feel that, immediately there can be a relief, like
Hmm.
oh, I feel for the first time in years settled in my body.
Right.
So that's one part of it. But the second part is we're looking at the process of neuroplasticity,
Hmm.
which is how the nervous system heals and changes.
Right.
And so for that to take place, we want a window of 6 to 8 weeks, high repetitions, specific practices,
Right.
and really, making sure that there's a consistency with it.
Hmm.
Then we are expecting to see changes from that,
Right.
both subjectively, like how we feel, and also there are ways that we would see this as well.
Right. Because is that you've been in this state for years, decades potentially. And so just like, if you gain 5 pounds a year, you can't go on a plan and expect you're going to lose, 30 pounds in a month, right? It's
Exactly.
going to take time to process through this. And I would imagine you've seen like that somebody who has been dealing with this for decades is going to have different stages of that release, right? As they go
Yeah.
through it. Like different times
Yes.
it's going to hit differently.
100%. I've found from students who've gone through our programs that many of the people who are dissociated and disconnected, they don't even know that they're in that state because they're
Mm,
so tuned out.
yeah.
So the first 3 weeks, when they start to map, we call it mapping your nervous system to know what's happening, not in a cognitive way, but in a
Hmm.
very um, embodied way,
Hmm.
they have this realization and a sadness that goes along with it of how long they've been in that state
Mm,
and feeling disconnected.
right.
And so initially there can be a grieving process for a lot of people around, I can't believe I've been
Mm,
living like this.
yeah.
But then from that comes this, you know, change in
Hmm.
energy. We wrapped up a group of students last week, and one woman who was an executive said, "I've come from burnout, flatness, brain fog. I can actually go back to work now." And that's that
Hmm.
for her. That was in 11 weeks, and she'd
Okay.
had a good 6 months. But we need to look at it as we would for as a personalized way. So
Hmm.
for some people, they're still coming off the back of long COVID,
Right.
and they're still having the brain fog, they're still exhausted.
Yeah.
And that's what, 5 years?
Yeah.
So there's a way, exactly what you said, where for some people, we will expect a significant change in 6 to 8 weeks. But some people, we might say, we want to keep consistent with it up till 6 months.
Hmm.
But I don't think this work has a finish line. Like once
Right.
you start noticing how it changes, for many people, it becomes a way that they live. Like they
Hmm.
start to say, I'm recognizing that I'm spending my time up in that mobilized state. I need to slow down, or I need to get rid of something, or I need to
Right.
make sure I have a walk in the morning, which is
Hmm.
what I think is so empowering about it. You're able to check in with what's happening once you have
Right.
that awareness.
Right. Because it's not, life is not just, oh, I found the fix and I can move on to the next thing, right? Because there's
Wouldn't
always
that
going to
be
be a trigger,
nice?
right? Like,
There'd be no weight loss industry at all,
right,
right? It would just
right,
be like everyone's done. But
right.
yeah, unfortunately. And then, the thing is we go so far and after I lost my brother, I did so much work, which
Mhm.
was great. But I never really saw how it had accumulated a bit like a bank until my
Right.
daughter was born and she was really unwell.
Mhm.
And most parents who have a baby in the NICU, like the neonatal
Mhm.
intensive care unit, most of them end up with some form of dysregulation because of
Right.
how stressful it is.
Yeah.
And look, I've found there were moments that were incredibly stressful, but I did not leave dysregulated. And I knew it was because I was using those resources throughout. So,
Right.
we can't control what's coming next, but
Right.
we're just equipped with more
Mhm.
resources. And that's really the essence of resilience is having
Yeah.
more resources than the
Right.
challenges you're facing.
Right. And I would imagine that not like, and you said this, that not all the resources are going to work for all the different, right? Like there's different tools for each. So so it's something that, like, okay, I've learned how to deal with this. Something else happens 5 years later, and you find yourself and you realize you're recognizing some of those things, but it's the fix isn't working, if you will, right? That doesn't
Exactly.
mean you're broken, doesn't mean it doesn't work anymore. It just means it doesn't work for that. It's like putting the wrong tire on a car when you've got a flat tire. It's the wrong
Yes.
size. It doesn't mean you still don't need to fix it.
Exactly. And I think there's so much in us having this ongoing practice so that
Mhm.
when we do get in more challenging situations, we know what to do.
Mhm.
But the opposite is also true. Like I see so many people playing out the same patterns relationally,
Mhm.
getting stuck in the same ways because
Yeah.
their nervous system defaults to it's going to be exactly the same.
Right.
And if we look at the way that our brain and nervous system predict things, they're not reading it accurately.
Mhm.
They're just predicting based on our past experiences. That's the story that so many people are living in. And I think
Right.
to me, that's why people need this work so that what's happening inside of them matches the reality of today, not
Right.
a distorted story around, I'm going to be left again like my parent did, or
Mhm.
I'll always fail or always fall short. So I think this is the work that creates that change in parts of the brain that have to do with our memory system.
Mhm.
And I think that's the most important thing. It's not about trying to be more positive or reframe it and ignore what's happening in our body. It's creating the changes so we don't predict the same things are going to happen.
Right. Well, and I love that you said that, because, that's the ignoring piece and the avoiding piece, and, like, assuming it's going to fix itself. Those are all things that never work.
I
Right?
know,
Like,
right?
unfortunately, we have to deal with it, right? It's like that conversation that you don't want to have with your spouse or your coworker or your boss. Like, it's just going to get worse until you deal with it, and so having those tools, yeah, is the biggest piece of the puzzle, because we we don't want, like, you can try, but you're not going to get a fulfilled life if you live a life trying to just avoid all those situations.
And I think, a lot of it is just trying to change the way we feel
Mhm.
instead of saying, okay, here are these sensations. What are they trying to tell me? I think people are immediately, like you said, trying to suppress
Mhm.
or trying to get rid of instead
Right.
of experiencing the sensations to let them bring that message. And sometimes it is a response from the past,
Mhm.
but if we have the tools, we can listen, we can have this language that tells us, okay, I'm scared that I'm going to be left
Right.
again in this relationship, or um, I think that, something bad could happen. And we can say, yes, well, it's healthy to have this fear.
Right.
Let's regulate that. And now let's see how that is. But I think that's the most important thing is rather than avoidance, rather than shutting down, rather than trying to get rid of. And if we look at what addiction is, I
Mhm.
mean, it's really trying to change the sensations in our body and how we
Right.
feel.
Yeah.
We can really look at, all right, well, how can I get better? Not tolerating sensations, but learning to contain, to be with, to listen,
Hmm.
just like we would, if we had a child that was having a really difficult time. How do
Right.
we be present with that? And I think that we have looked at well-being or emotional health as being the brain,
Yeah.
but it's really the way the sensations are communicating to the
Hmm.
brain that we see is the biggest part when we're really stressed.
Yeah. Um, so that brought up in my mind a situation that happened a couple weeks ago. One of the athletes that I was training, she just got her driver's license, and right on her way to the workout, I didn't know this until the very end, but on the way to the workout, she ran a red light for the first time like ever because she wasn't. I guess she didn't see it or didn't know the reactive, and her mom was like, "You've got to go," and so she was the whole workout. I could tell like something was off, right? She wasn't verbalizing it. She wasn't talking like normal. The workout was fine, like from a physical standpoint. But afterwards, I was like, okay, what's wrong? And she was like, what do you mean? I was like, something's off. Like, you got to get it out. Tell me what's wrong. And then she told me, she was like, I ran a red light. She started crying. And I was like, oh, it's okay. Like, but it's the first time. I'm like, it's not the last time. Like, it's the first time. It's not the last time. You will do it again. And that sort of she started to laugh and she was like, okay, okay, I get it. Maybe I'm making too much of this, right? And you could see the stress like immediately like start to relieve, in just like her body language, and she started becoming bubbly again. And I was like, that's what I'm here for. It's okay. Like, to bring these things out because the performance side of it was fine athletically, but for her to get what she needed out of the workout, her whole, she needed to be there present and mindful and not thinking about, oh my gosh, I just did this. And I can imagine all the different things she was thinking, during the workout, thinking back to, because I've done that myself, right? Like you have something go wrong and you're thinking about that instead of being in the moment of what you're supposed to be doing. And then you're like, you're just processing over and over and over in your head all the different things that went wrong.
Yes.
And that's just adding to the stress level, right? And so instead of when you recognize that, just go, wait a minute, okay, I need to deal with this first, then move on to the next thing.
Yes, exactly. And I think there's a part when we have maybe that shame
Hmm.
around something, that shame is linked to that part of our nervous system that tells us a story, you don't belong,
Hmm.
you're almost pushed out of the tribe from an evolutionary
Right.
point of view. So that's why
Right.
shame's there, so that you behave and conform.
Hmm.
So it's thought.
Yeah.
But I think when somebody else is able to co-regulate with us and give us that sense of belonging, it is like the perfect antidote. And that is obviously what she needed and what
Yeah.
attuned to her nervous system. And she came back towards regulation. So
Yeah.
I think, we have talked so much about this as an individual part,
Hmm.
but like you've probably seen with your son, um, and like for me as a practitioner, I used to think my greatest tool was my manual therapy skills or my
Hmm.
diagnostics or the, exercises I could use with a stroke
Right.
patient. It wasn't. It was my ability to co-regulate. And
Yeah.
we actually teach this as the therapeutic use of self because
Hmm.
we think therapeutic is like therapy,
Yeah.
but it's not. Like to be deeply listened to be seen when we feel shame, to be accepted and supported, that is a therapeutic experience that can change the state of somebody's nervous system. And I think if we can do that for our community,
Yeah.
we are creating very strong, healthy communities, but not always easy, especially
Right.
in a world that is quite divisive, and probably trying to push more separation. But I think for us to be able to bring that co-regulation to our communities, that's really what we need right now.
Right. And a lot of times it takes that person who's, when I say level-headed, but like that is regulated to be able to help the person regulate,
Yes,
right? And so because two dysregulated people may not be able to find the way out of this, of where they are. And
yeah,
so a lot of times it takes that person that is regulated, which is why it's so important to learn how to do this ourselves so that we can be that stabilizing factor for somebody else.
absolutely. And you spoke about this with your son with
Mhm.
things that happen in utero. We have a relational nervous system. Like
Mhm.
we are being impacted before we're even born. And I've got a 2-year-old daughter, and she's a mirror to my nervous system. Like if I'm
Yeah.
hurrying and I'm running around, she starts
Mhm.
having baby zoomies, and
Yep.
it's like, oh, she's just responding back. So,
Mhm.
there's definitely good research that shows this emotional contagion,
Mhm.
synchronization. There was a really interesting study done that looked at leaders, like leaders of an
Mhm.
organization, and the people that work for them would start to synchronize with the beats of their heart to match the
Oh,
leader.
wow.
So it didn't go the other way around,
Mhm.
interestingly, in leadership. But just for us, if we are a parent, if we
Right.
are a coach, if we are a practitioner, it is our regulation that can
Mhm.
create these really powerful shifts for people. And I think
Right.
we put a lot of emphasis on saying the right thing and, having this perfect way to put something into place to help somebody. But
Mhm.
it's really our energy and our presence. And
Right.
I really try and think about that with my daughter is, yes, language matters, but what matters the most is how I feel to her.
Mhm.
And I think we probably look at that as a little bit of woo-woo, but when you see the science on synchronization, it
Right.
makes a lot of sense.
No, it does. And I've been looking into that energy side of it more and more over the past couple of years because I can see that definitely impacts what I do with people in the coaching side of it in how they respond to the different ideas and suggestions that I present to them of how to improve.
Mm.
And when I bring more energy and a better stabilized energy, positive side of it, but it's not necessarily just positive, negative, because sometimes as a coach you got to be the heavy, you know,
Yes. And
and
give good feedback that
right,
is needed.
yeah, but it's the way you do it that you get the correct response back. So,
Yes. Yes, definitely. And I think if we create those cultures of trust,
mhm,
but also honesty. If,
right,
if if people know that you care deeply about them, but you also need to deliver very honest
mhm,
feedback that sometimes can make people upset. I
right,
think as long as you've created that culture of safety and trust,
mhm,
ultimately it's well received. I think most people do appreciate the honesty with
right,
that,
yep,
feedback to improve, whether it's through an organization or as an athlete,
yep,
as a patient. Sometimes
mhm,
people need to be told when they're not being responsible enough for their own health. So,
right,
um, yeah, it's not about being nice. And I think this
mhm,
is one thing that we can look at with parenting or any of those areas that we work with. It's not about us just being this nice person. It's really about us and our being able to stay in regulation,
mhm,
and then do whatever we need to, the best we
right,
can.
right, yep. So for someone who this has struck a chord with and is like, okay, I want to learn more about what Jessica's doing and learn more about how I can empower myself or as a practitioner, start working with people in utilizing techniques and things like that. How do they get in touch with you? Do you have a website or following online, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so the best place to find everything is on my website, which is
Mhm.
my name, jessicamaguire.com. But I
Okay.
do hang out quite a bit on Instagram. So
Okay.
you can find me there as repairing the nervous system.
Awesome. So I will link those in the show notes. Before we wrap up, is there anything that we didn't touch on that you would say, okay, this is something that people need to make sure that they know in regards to understanding the vagus nerve and how to regulate and seeing when they're not in, when they're dysregulated?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing would be, first of all, knowing that when we have a good understanding of our states, we begin to see it's not me,
Mhm.
it's my nervous system. So there's more space. But when we're
Right.
really caught and just reactive, sometimes we feel that we are that response. So
Hmm.
that's really where this work brings a lot of freedom from
Hmm.
suffering. But also, we touched a little bit on neuroplasticity, and I think the important part for people to know with what we've been discussing is that these networks in the brain and in the body are capable of change.
Right.
And neuroplasticity is referring mostly to what we say neurons or the nerve cells in the brain, but it's the entire body that
Hmm.
changes when we do nervous system work. So the gut, it's our ability to listen to our bodily signals. So really just to know that I believe that this is the most transformative work we can do.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, and I totally agree with that fact that you can see the change happen, because it will. It's the body's made to, because obviously if we can see it go in the negative way, we can reverse it and see it come back in the positive way.
Exactly.
So,
That's
yeah,
right. It's that the dark side of neuroplasticity is what it takes us into anxiety
right,
and shutdown, but the it is also that neuroplasticity that gets us out of it.
right. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jessica. It's been a great conversation.
Thanks for having me, Jerry.
Yeah. Thanks for checking out the Confidence Through Health podcast. Please subscribe, post a review, share this episode with those you love who need a little extra help with their health journey. Visit allinhealthandwellness.com to learn more about the coaching programs that I provide. All episodes are produced by the Social Media Cowboys, your source for all online marketing needs. Go to socialmediacowboys.com for more information.